Big blunders in the tech space, the state of digital transformations in Europe, and how to spot trouble before your digital transformation fails. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 245 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control is a major fun.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 245. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO at Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And this is the tech-agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of your digital transformation initiative. So thank you for being here today. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Great show planned for you today. Some really juicy, meaty topics we're going to get into today. We're going to start off with some social media questions we've received recently. And we're also going to get into a couple of blunders in the tech space in recent days and weeks. We have the Deloitte AI debacle in Australia. And then here in the US, we have the Amazon Web Services outage that affected businesses throughout the world and also highlighted or underscored some of the risk or the dark side potentially of cloud computing, and especially as it relates to big hyperscalers like AWS. And then later in the show, we'll have Stuart Robb on the show. He's going to be on to talk about the state of the union of digital transformation in Europe. So we're going to talk about what is the state of the union, what is the state of technology and digital transformation, and how is it different in Europe. And we're going to get into some really good stuff there, even if you're not in Europe. I still highly suggest listening to that conversation because a lot of what we're seeing in Europe are trends that we think will end up spreading to other parts of the world as well. So it's really important to be aware of that as a leader in technology. And then finally, later in the show, we'll get into how to spot trouble before your digital transformation fails. So we'll talk about some of the red flags and warning signs you can be looking for before they become too big of a problem and to give you enough time to remediate those problems. So before we get to all that, though, we've received, as always, we receive a ton of questions on social media platforms and outlets, and we're always culling through those and trying to answer them on the platforms themselves. And of course, we cherry pick some of those for the conversation here in this podcast. So what kind of questions have we received recently, Darian?
Yeah, this first one's really interesting. It has to do kind of with AI. So once tedious tasks are automated, how do consultants' roles get redefined? Automation will be normalized. So how do you differentiate yourself? What are the human actions that are most valuable to customers in the brave new world?
You know, that's an interesting point because when you look at what consultants do, you know, on the surface, it may be simple enough to say, well, AI can do a lot of that work for you, whether it's analyzing or researching or creating a deliverable or a graphic or a PowerPoint slide, whatever it is. And that is true. AI can do a lot of that stuff for you. But one thing I've learned in my career, whether I worked at big consulting firms or whether it's now working at a smaller consulting firm like Third Stage, one thing I noticed is even as consultants, even though you know what needs to be done, you don't always have time or resources to get it all done. You know, you can always do better. And that goes for our projects too. As good as I think we are at consulting, there's stuff we could always do better, even for our own clients and the best transformations we've been involved with. There's still things you wish you could have done better or whatever the case may be. So I think what AI does is, yes, it will automate some of the lower value types of activities, the more tedious work that consultants do. But what I think that has the opportunity to do is to free up time to focus more on your clients and less time on technology. So I think that's something that I haven't really addressed much in YouTube videos or in this podcast in the past. But the more I sort of percolate on this whole concept of AI and how it's affecting consulting and how we're seeing it affect our business and how we're intentionally embracing AI to try and disrupt our own business model, that's something we're noticing is it really allows you to sort of turn outward instead of being inwardly focused on all the deliverables you have to create, or doing this analysis, or doing research, or God forbid, messing around with a PowerPoint slide deck for hours and hours on end. Now, instead, you could be talking to your client to trying to understand more about the client and trying to solve their problems more, rather than just building better, PowerPoint decks or reports or whatever the case may be. So I think it just opens up the focus a bit. But to your point, you have to redefine that role. What do you expect of consultants? And I think this is where I think actually entry-level consultants are the most at risk with AI. I think that's going to be the problem, is how do you, if you have a green, newer consultant, one of the ways you would learn the ropes in consulting, and this is how I learned the ropes, just like thousands and hundreds of thousands of consultants before me, one of the way you learn the ropes is by doing that tedious grunt work. You're the one doing the PowerPoint presentations in the back room. You're the one writing reports. But in the process, you're learning, and you're learning the lingo. You're learning how to solve client problems. And I don't know, I worry about the career development opportunities for new consultants that don't have any experience. I think senior people are going to be okay, because now, like, for example, I can create content that I wasn't creating before. I would ask someone else to do for me. Now I can just do it myself with AI. And so if you look at that magnified in a consulting team, if I'm a senior person and I can actually have those client interactions, and I understand business, I understand technology, I understand strategy, I'm going to be a lot more valued now. And the question becomes, how do I groom people below me to get to that level if there's less opportunity for them with AI? So that's the bigger problem, I think. But I think overall, consultants now have an opportunity to grow into a more client-focused role rather than inwardly focused.
Yeah, that's some great points there, Eric. And our next question today is, what happens to all the pre-configured connectors when you customize the systems they're connecting to?
Say that again. What happens to the connectors?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, the connectors themselves, generally speaking, they should survive any sort of customization or changes to the software. I mean, that's not always true, but that's why, companies like Boomi and Rapid, Palantir, some of these connector types of platforms that are meant to pull together different platforms across or different systems across platforms. That's why those companies are doing so well right now, is because they do create these common languages, I guess you could call it, almost like middleware, 20 or 30 years ago. It's not anything new, really. It's just more sophisticated and more advanced than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And it has a different name now. It's, now it's more of, platform development tools versus middleware. And so, it allows you to not only connect systems, but create workflows, amongst different systems. So you can look at your processes more end to end, even if you have siloed different systems you're using across the organization. So I think it's a good question, though. I think it's in the way you customize. You just need to make sure that whatever customization you're doing isn't affecting the exit or the touch point that you would need to connect to another system. If you're changing the workflow that's going to produce the same output that then gets connected or integrated to another system, but you're changing stuff in the workflow, then it's probably okay. But if you're changing the output in the way it would connect to another system, that's pretty hardcore development or changes to the software that you may not want to do anyway, but especially if you're integrating with other systems. So it just depends on the type of customization you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. But I'm really excited to get into our newsworthy articles today. Eric, I'm excited to hear your take on both of these articles today, actually. So this first one is talking about Deloitte and their AI debacle. Deloitte Australia agreed to refund part of a $440,000, which is about 290,000 US dollars, contract payment after it submitted a report containing AI-generated errors to the Australian Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. The report on the department's IT system for automating welfare penalty calculations contained a fabricated court judgment quote and references to non-existent academic research. The key takeaways from this article is that AI is obviously not just like a truth engine, and everything AI produces needs to be looked over and have that human insight. And then professional responsibility remains critical. So experts emphasize that finance and accounting professionals must apply judgment, verify AI outputs, and not treat them as turnkey deliverables. A couple other ones is governance and disclosure matter. So organizations are being reminded that AI tools require robust governance frameworks, especially when used in external deliverables, compliance, or decision-making contexts. Eric, with this, I was excited when I heard this article. I was excited to hear your take on it. But overall, what was your first reaction when you heard this come out on the news and all of that?
Well, my first reaction was, I wonder how often this is happening without us all hearing about it. And I think the fact that we're dealing with a government agency is probably why we're hearing about it now, because it's the end client was a government entity, and those organizations are more likely to publicize that sort of information and in the spirit of transparency to their constituents and whatnot. But I imagine this is not an isolated case. I imagine it's happening more than any of us would like to admit. And I think it's a stark reminder that, AI is not, to your point, it's not always right, and it needs human intervention and validation and augmentation in order to be successful. I also do wonder, like, how did it create its own, like misquoted court cases and things like that? I'm like, where did it get that information? I had to get it from somewhere, but it makes you wonder if, like, what happened behind the scenes with the training of that particular model that caused it to hallucinate like that. But I don't have a good answer to that. Have they said, or did you get any more intel in the article you're referring to?
No, I think it just pulled, from, like, the exact quote was, it pulled from non-existent academic research. So I don't know what the glitch or, like, whatever situation happened there, but definitely not ideal.
Yeah.
For that. With that as well, though, in what way should companies disclose AI's role in report generation, especially when material findings or citations are involved?
Good question. I mean, I think, transparency is always key with your clients, partially because you want them to know, like, hey, we're using AI, here's how we're using it. And you just want them to understand how the sausage is made, so to speak. And I think that's something that's going to be hard for the consulting industry in general, because some of the big tier one consultancy and the larger consulting firms especially are notorious for, a sort of Wizard of Oz, don't look behind the curtain sort of approach to consulting, where it's like, don't worry about it. We've got this team of 50 people here. They're all experts. Don't worry. It's just, and you have like a face of the team that will deal with the client, and without having that transparency into how people are creating reports or deliverables or whatever. So I think that's going to be a cultural shock or a difficult change for a lot of consulting firms. But I think that transparency is key. I think that part of why transparency is key is also because you want the client to sign off on or be comfortable with the fact that you're using their information in an AI model. And for example, we at Third Stage use our own proprietary AI tool and model that we use to analyze client situations and compare client analytics and metrics and benchmarks to other clients we've worked with over the years. So we've trained our own AI model, but we have to make sure that clients are comfortable with that, because even though their information is going to be confidential, we're not revealing individual client information about them to other clients. It is aggregated and used in the analysis. And so you just need to make sure they're comfortable with that. So there's like an ethical and intellectual property confidentiality sort of angle you have to look at too. And then of course you just want to make sure that if you're a consulting firm and you're using AI, you've got a bullseye on you now to make sure you get it right and you don't screw it up. So if you do something like this case where you've just completely misquoted stuff and made stuff up that you didn't validate, you're going to have a world of hurt having the conversation with the client like this firm or this team must have had, which is, why did we pay you all this money if you're just going to give us garbage that came out of an AI model that isn't even right? So why did I pay you? Like, what, I could have done that myself, would be my reaction to that if I were the client. So those are just some of the questions that come to mind as it relates to that.
For sure. And to kind of build on that, how might boards and audit committees update their oversight role given the growing use of AI in these workflows?
Yeah, there's a lot of catching up that boards and leaders have to do to get policies in place to match their AI policies and usage. We of all of our clients, we only have a small handful that actually have formal policies about AI. A lot of them are still trying to figure it out, or they're still toying with ideas on what that might look like. And it's hard because AI is a bit of a moving target right now. We don't know where it's going to land and how it's going to settle. So I think, if there is, if you're in a highly regulated space or you've got highly confidential information that you just don't want anything to do with AI, then you need to state that. And I think about, government contractors or aerospace and defense companies, contractors, things like that, government entities themselves, financial services organizations might be sensitive to that as well. So I think you have to look at your business model and the risk of AI and put parameters in place where you need to mitigate risk. And if there's some stuff that you still can't determine whether or not AI is appropriate or whether or not you want to set a policy, you just have to be willing to roll with the punches and let that become a breathing, living document that evolves with the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting for sure. When I heard that, I was like shocked. I heard it all over the news while I was actually in Canada even. So
Interesting.
Going everywhere for sure. But I want to get into something that also happened recently, and that's the Amazon Web Service outage, which I'm sure a lot of people got affected by that are probably listening to this podcast right now. But if you haven't heard about this, AWS experienced a major global outage on Monday, October 20th. Or it was originating from its US East 1 region, which is Northern Virginia. The root cause was a DNS error triggered within the EC2 internal network, which prevented services from resolving addresses and disrupted over 100 cloud services. Although AWS restored most services by the evening, some functionalities like messaging queues or different things like that still had some backlogs. So some key takeaways from this article was single region dependency risk. So the failure on the US East 1, AWS's largest and oldest cloud region, demonstrates how localized issue can cascade globally. And then DNS failure impacts everything. The incident shows that when the map, in quotations map, of the internet fails, services can still have data but not reach it. And then cross-industry impact. So a broad range of sectors were affected, whether it was gaming, finance, even Venmo, messaging, government digital services, smart home devices like the Ring doorbells and other things like that. No matter what industry it was, it seemed like there was at least one company affected by this outage. And then the architecture learning moment was for enterprise technology leaders. This is kind of like a wake-up call or just a reminder that reliance on a single public cloud region or service can introduce you to some risk. So Eric, the reason I was excited for you to react to this article when I saw that this was happening is because I know you have some takes on the risk that cloud can bring to different companies. So what was your reaction overall when this outage was happening?
It was really interesting, first of all, because I was surprised how widespread it was. I don't recall AWS having a similar outage in the past. I know we've heard about a lot of companies having their own individual outages for various systems, whether they're cloud or not. For example, a combination of outages and cybersecurity breaches, I should say. So the fact that this was so widespread and so many organizations or so many companies were completely helpless in the situation, I think it was just a good reminder that you've got to have backup plans and contingency plans for what if your provider goes down or is unreliable. It's too easy to think that, because it's AWS or Google or Azure, they're big, massive hyperscaler with thousands of companies using it. It's easy to think or be lulled into complacency thinking that everything's going to be fine and there's no way that AWS will ever have an outage. Well, clearly they did. And, when banking's affected, retail transactions can't happen. A lot of big deal. There's a lot of Shopify, I think, was affected too. I can't remember if you mentioned that or if I saw it somewhere, but a lot of companies were affected, Venmo, obviously. So, I think that's the key, is just to recognize there is a risk there. They make mistakes too. There are vulnerabilities even with AWS, but it's also just how widespread that is. Because, one thing is I posted a short TikTok video on TikTok, and I did a short on Instagram and YouTube about it. It was interesting to see, the conversation in the comments about that, about people saying, well, yeah, it is a risk, but the cost is, the cost savings is worth it. The scale is worth it. Other people made comments about, well, yeah, but, you hear about this because it's a big, massive AWS outage. If it was an individual company with on-prem outage, you wouldn't hear about it, And that is a good point that, because this is a big deal, because it's AWS, you hear about it, whereas there's probably lots more that we just never hear about on a smaller scale because it's more isolated. But the fact that it's more isolated means it's less risk to the economy and to other businesses as well. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, I suppose. So I'll be curious to see, I would love to hear people's comments here on this podcast in the chat or in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, should we be concerned, or is this just the price of doing business now in this new cloud world we're operating in?
Yeah, for sure. And I know you mentioned like companies should have some sort of backup plan. What would that like failover strategy kind of look like if they had one?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is just making sure you've got a sort of a backup plan business wise. So what are you going to do when, if you can't use your systems, but you're a manufacturer, let's say, you can still physically build product. You can still pick, pack, and ship it, all that stuff. It just maybe you can't use your system for a short period. What are you going to do in that period? That becomes the big question that needs to be thought about. So yeah, that's the way I'd look at it.
Got it. Yeah. Super interesting. It was really interesting to watch it kind of all play out on that day. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of switch gears here and get into our conversation of the day.
Yeah, I'm excited too. This should be really interesting. We're going to have Stuart Robb on the show, who is our executive vice president at our office in Europe, our Third Stage Consulting in Europe. So he's the one that leads our teams there. He helps identify and deliver new clients in the European region. He's based out of the UK, but works throughout the EU as well. So excited to have him on the show to talk about the state of digital transformation here in 2025 and what some of the nuances are that you should be aware of if you're in Europe. And even if you're not in Europe, I highly recommend listening, because we are going to talk about some regulatory type stuff that's developing in Europe that is likely to affect other parts of the world as well. So be sure to stick around for that. And then later in the show, we'll get into a conversation around how to identify project risks before they become too much of a problem. So be sure to stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we publish. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
Wake me up inside. I can't wake up. Wake me up inside. Call my name and save me now.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 245. My name's Eric Kimberling. This is the tech agnostic podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. And I'm here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So excited for our next guest here. This is Stuart Robb, is Executive Vice President and has been Executive Vice President here at Third Stage since 2019. Stuart and I go back quite a ways, and he helps us in the European region in terms of building the teams there, the client base, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to talk to him about what he's seeing boots on the ground in Europe as far as digital transformations. So with that all being said, Stuart, thanks for being here today.
Thanks very much for having me, Eric. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, good to see you. We had a chance to see each other last week in Europe, and we've had some great conversations, not just last week, but over the years of working together, of comparing notes on trends in the industry. And I'm really excited to get into today's conversation. Before I jump in and start asking you questions, though, I want to say hello to our audience that's joining us here live. Thank you for being here. Love to see what city and country you're joining from. So if you don't mind, just drop in the chat, what city and country are you joining from here today? We tend to draw people from not only all over Europe, but from all over the world. So would love to hear your questions and thoughts throughout the conversation today. But to start, just let us know where you're joining from today, and we'll keep an eye on any questions or comments you have for Stuart and I here today. But before we jump into our questions, some of the questions I have for you today, Stuart, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background. You've got quite the illustrious career here in the consulting world and the technical world.
So I've been in IT since 1984, which makes me very old. Started on IBM mainframe, and then got involved with Anderson Consulting as it was in about 1997. On an ERP and CRM program, and then worked for them, Ernst & Young, as an executive consultant, then on to Capgemini Consulting Australia, head of transformation consulting, and then freelance until I hooked up with you. When was that? About 2019, wasn't it? So
yeah, I think early 2019.
Little bit of a hiatus where I kind of semi-retired for a little while, and now I'm back with a vengeance. So yeah, but a very broad industry skill set, medium size and large FTSE organizations, across finance, supply chain. Mostly the European practice is focused on private equity. So the European practice done a lot of work with the likes of Apri Capital and Astorg and similar organizations. That's just where we kind of landed our European business.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good clients we've worked with here in recent years at third stage consulting in Europe. And, one reason I really enjoy working with you and just being colleagues with you in general is not only do you have a lot of experience with a lot of different consulting firms and technologies and that sort of thing, but you're also a bit of a skeptic. I would say you're a bit of a skeptic like myself. So it's always fun to compare notes with or hear your thoughts on some of this stuff.
Far more skeptical than you, Eric.
Because you've got about 10 years on me in terms of your career longevity. So give me a few more years. So I guess to start, I know this is a really broad question, but just, when you look at when you started your career in 84 and even getting into, you've been through a lot, Y2K and, the financial meltdown of the late, 2008, 2010 period. So you've seen a lot of ups and downs in the tech industry. You've seen a lot of consulting firms come and go, technology firms come and go. So how would you, if you look back at your career and look at where we are today, how would you just describe the state of the union, and so to speak, here in digital transformations, particularly in Europe and in the UK where you're based?
That's a very broad question. I mean, the funny thing is that in my life, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Yeah.
So when I started in computing, it was big centralized computers running centralized applications. And then it became everything was going to be distributed, and it was all open systems, client server, this, that, and the other. And then it was ASPs, and now it's back to highly centralized computing platforms, whether mainframes, let's call them that, whether that's the Google mainframe or the SAP mainframe or the Amazon mainframe runs everything, and you're effectively just on a dumb terminal. So in fact, whilst the graphics and the visualization has become a bit better, in respect of the computing itself, we're almost back to where we started. And it was quite interesting. I mean, have things improved for the better? Well, I was talking to a friend of mine about their cyber incident. And in 1984, if you'd had a incident on a mainframe and it went down, and if you didn't have it back up working in 24 hours, you were going to be fired. I mean, that was it. You were sacked. Yeah, right. Because you could recover a mainframe in 24 hours, have all the applications back up and running, and be carrying on. And nowadays, it's months. I mean, we've had Jaguar Land Rover, we've had the Cooperative, we've had various other major companies in the UK all suffer cyber hits, which have taken them out for months. And even Amazon, on whom the UK government has a huge number of services that it supplies to UK citizens, on AWS was out for 2 days and nobody could access anything. So we're seeing this transition to digital ID and digital banking and CBDCs and what have you. And all that's happening is we're putting more and more reliance on technology with less and less ability to manage it properly. And that's kind of controversial. But as I said, there is an assumption that everything that happens is happening for the better. Well, we had Concorde. We were able to land on the moon. We're not able to do either of those two things today. So to say everything is better, I think is actually, this is where the skeptic in me comes in, right?
Yeah, and you have to look at why are people so excited about this new model, not this relatively new, but not so new model, to your point about ASPs coming and going back in the early 2000s, which is basically a predecessor to the cloud managed service model that we have today. Yeah. But people are, in general, the industry is very excited about it. But you have to look at why are they so excited? Is it the concept itself that's so exciting, or is it the fact that is it the profit behind it?
It's cost. I mean, let's call it out what it is, right? It's cheaper to get somebody else to run your computing for you than it is to provide your own net servers and infrastructure and support people and what have you. So offloading that whole problem onto a third party is cheaper, and therefore that's why would they not want to do that? Well, the reason is because as soon as you do that, you lose control of your own destiny. So it was very interesting. There was an article published in I think it was the Times last week. That was the UK government recommending all businesses have business interruption and business continuity plans that are written down on paper. And you would never have had to say that 30 or 40 years ago. That would have just been the default. Everybody would have had the disaster recovery plan and the business continuity plan and the backup tapes ready to go at a moment's notice. And now half of these organizations don't even have backup tapes. They've got such vast swathes of data that the idea of backing them up to tape overnight is ridiculous. So when they get hit with a cyber encryption attack, they're knackered. The data's encrypted. That's it. They pay up or they jog on. And it's extraordinary, in fact, how we think things have got better, and actually in some respects they've got a whole lot worse.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I mean, it's for all the benefit of cloud and SaaS-based computing services, there certainly are benefits. Like you mentioned, costs can be lower, but the transition to the cloud for a lot of organizations is super painful, even more painful than a typical upgrade that you would have seen 10 or 20 years ago, because now you've got a bit less flexibility. You're not going to be able to customize that solution the way you could have in the past necessarily. So there's a lot of pain and hidden costs that goes along with it that a lot of people overlook or gloss over.
There's a couple of aspects to that. The first is what drives business benefit, right? So if we're talking about an ERP, an accounting system, I mean, accounting systems basically haven't changed since 1970. In fact, I was talking to someone a while ago. When I started, the very first accounting system I ever used was a mainframe accounting system, which was based on a system developed by Martin Marietta Systems. The system doesn't exist, but it was a set of COBOL programs that added up and took away. And in fact, even the very early version of SAP did broadly the same thing. It was lots of mainframe files that added up and took away. And if you come to 2025, an accounting system is basically still a system that adds up and takes away. It's just got lots of fancy user interface over the top of it, but you're not going to get a lot of business benefit from doing good adding up and taking away. You can get some automation benefits, but that's about it. So I think companies that try to look for ERP in itself for business benefit are going to struggle. Where they get the business benefit is around some of the peripheral activities, such as improving their supply chain or their demand planning models or things like that, which are things that humans tend to do quite badly. The modeling tools out there now can do a lot better. But is it transformational? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, we did work for a client a few years ago in Europe about route planning and working out whether it was better to have lots more small distribution hubs across Europe or whether it was better to have central larger distribution hubs in 2 or 3 countries. And the software that did that was amazing, and it was extraordinary, and it came up with an answer that no amount of processing by 20 human beings could ever have come up with.
Right.
And so you look at AI, can AI do it better? Well, maybe a bit better, but it was pretty good then, right? So you struggled to do a lot better than you did five or so years ago.
Yeah. That's, I mean, good point. I have a follow-up question. So hold that thought. I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that, but I want to turn to the audience real quick because we're getting some comments coming in here. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Good morning, Darian. Abdul on YouTube says, hi, Eric. I was reading your digital transformation book. Welcome to the jungle. Really good insights shared. So thank you for that. That book just came out a few weeks ago. You can get that on Amazon. If you go to Amazon, you can get electronically, paperback, and hardcover anywhere in the world, including throughout Europe. So if wherever you live, you can get a hard copy or electronic copy. So thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the book there. Bearwave on YouTube says, great insight. Thank you for that. Yuri on LinkedIn says, everything that happens for the better. Just question better for who? And
Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And the global elites and the WEF and all of those people.
Yeah, that's the thing is whenever you and I talk, we always run the risk of getting into politics, which we have many, which we have many times. But without getting into politics, it does raise a question of, are we comfortable as a business and society having that much concentrated power, if you will? I mean, it really is about power and control of data. And I don't necessarily mean in a dystopian George Orwellian sort of way. I just mean, you're ceding control of your applications, your data, your workflows, your operations. In many ways, you're ceding control to these big tech companies. And you have to ask yourself, is that a good thing long term? Or are we going to see a whiplash where things come back and the pendulum settles somewhere in a more balanced way? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, power has always been consolidated in the center, right? I mean, you look at JP Morgan, that he didn't come from nowhere, neither did Rothschild. And so, you always find in every era there's a concentration of power, even if you go back to like 1050 when William the Conqueror was plotting his invasion of England. There was a concentration of power. So I don't think just because we're 2,000 years further on, we're necessarily that much more insightful. And I think the same is true of any modern tech. You're always going to get somebody who's able to exploit that and build a business out of it, and that business will become dominant for a while. But we're going to talk about SAP later. You take IBM as an example. In 1983, you couldn't buy a computer that wasn't IBM for the most part. There were a couple of OEM manufacturers. There was Digital and one or two other, what we call sort of tier twos. But nobody could conceive of anything other than buying IBM. And there was a great conversation we had last week about, you never got sacked for buying IBM until all of a sudden you did, because IBM was ridiculously overpriced and could be done with other technologies. And then all of a sudden IBM are no longer the dominant player. And so that will continue to happen. Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and, Larry Page and Larry Ellison, and all the rest of them will fall by the wayside eventually. It may take 50 years, it may take 100, but things will change.
Yeah, I think I'll be curious to see. I feel like we're at that inflection point again now, just with AI, some of these niche competitors that are popping up. Now it's easier than ever to start a tech company. I mean, think how easy, like a non-technologist now could suddenly think, wait, I don't need to know how to code to start a tech company. I could use AI. Obviously you can hire or offshore it. So the barriers to entry are a lot lower now. And I think the more some of the big companies some of the big tech companies push into this one size fits all space, I think the more likely we are to see a major shift in the market with someone finding an alternative solution to that.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've got a couple of young daughters and I'm teaching them mainframe COBOL, partly because that's a proper computing language, not like the nonsense we get there today, but also because actually that's dying out. And nobody's investing in tools for COBOL, or at least not significantly. IBM have made a couple of efforts, and it's absolutely awful. But no bank or airline or insurance company are going to invest billions in redeveloping their IBM mainframe systems because they work and they're incredibly secure. I mean, when was the last time you heard of an airline or a bank being hacked successfully? The answer is almost never, because mainframes are really, really, really robust and hard to get into. It's all the peripheral systems like the online portals and the access systems that fall over and don't happen. So I still use mainframe. I create all of our company invoices on an IBM mainframe emulation because I just love it.
Yeah.
But as I said, it goes back to this idea that technology somehow is good because it's new technology. And we'll talk about AI in a while, but I'm not buying it. I mean, it's if you look at, it's a bubble. There is no question, because when you look at NVIDIA are investing in Oracle, and Oracle are investing in somebody else, and then somebody else are investing in NVIDIA, that is all circular money to push up, to inflate the share price. That has got nothing to do with, creating a leading edge technology platform. This is all about, shareholder equity. And, you can't have a company that's got, 42 times earnings, share price, when its actual earnings are 3 times, its value. So there is a big reset coming. And I think all of this will get a strong, hard, reevaluation as to what the fundamentals are around technology and around computing. And then we will see where the direction of travel is. But I think we are at this, it's like the 2000 .com bubble, right? We're at that same inflection point. And I think we're in for a reset, and whether that's a small reset, or a like 2001, or a big reset like 2008, we'll see. But we're long overdue.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. Here's a question or a comment from Abdul on YouTube. Says, I'm currently working as a business analyst, part of a digital transformation program for supply chain. Simply loving your insights shared by Third Stage Consulting. I would love to be part of your team. So thank you for the kind words there. We'd love to chat with you about how that might happen. So reach out to us. Carmen on LinkedIn says you are 100% correct. So
about almost every subject.
I was going to say, I think that's a blanket statement. Everything you've said so far is 100% correct. I think
there we go. Happy with that.
Andy on LinkedIn, thanks for joining today, Andy. Andy says people expect magic to happen when moving to a new ERP or cloud ERP.
Yes,
However, they don't transform the processes. A bad process move to cloud is still broken, just faster. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And funny enough, one of the topics that we kind of talked about before was, people are expecting the technology to be probably better than it is now. So I'm dealing with a client at the moment that's implementing Microsoft Dynamics 365 F&O. And part of that solution is the expenses solution. And when the business saw the expenses solution of Dynamics 365 F&O, they couldn't believe how rubbish it was. And it, compared to some of these newer startups, it is genuinely awful. But then we had a conversation, and it was really interesting. How good do you want an expenses solution to be? Because how much do you really want people putting expenses in? If you make it a bit tricky and a bit horrible, then they're less likely to put expenses in. And that was a genuine conversation in a customer. But there's now an expectation that technology is well ahead of its capability, and that's even true of chatbots and the AI side of large language models, is that people expect it to be a lot cleverer than it is, and actually it's about as clever as a small child. It really is not very good at all, and then everybody gets very disappointed when you spend 20 minutes talking to a chatbot and it doesn't answer your question, and then doesn't even offer you the opportunity to go and speak to someone that can solve your problem. And so that's why I think AI, one of the many reasons that I think AI is hype and it's a bubble.
Yeah. I have a comment here I'm going to get to in a moment about that I want to get your reaction to. But first, Paul on LinkedIn says adding up and taking away hasn't changed. great point. We just pay more for the same benefit and features we don't necessarily need in ERP systems.
Well, and more interestingly, we don't want to pay more for it, which is why SAP are in such a lot of trouble at the moment, because they want people to be on their spangly new, very expensive HANA system, and anyone who's got £1 billion worth of investment in ECC6 doesn't want to spend any money with SAP migrating, because what do they get for it? They get Fiori apps and they get the promise of AI that doesn't actually do anything for them. And they go, no, thanks. We'll stay with what we are. And that's why SAP kept kicking the support date down the road. Since 2017, I think they've kicked it down the road at least 4 times. And now that they've put a hard end date, that's creating its own reaction in the marketplace, which is not going down very well. So, so it's a point well made. The risk and the cost of changing has to be outweighed by very, very, very clear benefits. And if there aren't very, very clear benefits, customers are going to resist. And the larger and more complex the customer, the more likely they are to resist, which is why all of the really, really big UK and European firms are just not moving.
Yeah, it's less than half, I believe, worldwide, and I presume it's similar in the EU and UK as well.
Yeah, I mean, usually the reason for transferring up is because there's some critical business event, like a divestment or something like that, that's creating a business change off the back of which the company has no choice. But if it's a static choice of, we're on ECC6 for our pharma business and SAP want us to move to HANA, the answer is no. And that's right across the board, particularly in the larger organizations that have much more clout. And we have this antitrust thing now about SAP maintenance. And because SAP have now made it a properly hard deadline, the rumor has it that the very, very big firms have been lobbying the EU to take out an antitrust action against SAP as a lever to get SAP to push the support date for ECC6 out indefinitely. And they're saying by this antitrust, well, if you won't support it indefinitely, then we need organizations who will. Now, that's a real danger for SAP, because their maintenance revenue keeps their ongoing operations going, but they're just not getting the revenue that they need from new footprints or enhancements and upgrades to HANA. So SAP are in this really difficult position. And when we talked a little bit earlier about that problem that IBM had, that they were so big and monolithic and slow that they just couldn't keep up with the migration away from mainframes, well, SAP, I think, are heading very much towards the same position. And therefore, their business model is highly imperiled at the moment. And it will be fascinating to see what happens, because you've got all these very large corporations paying very large sums of money in annual support to SAP, but SAP are stuck in this rut of not being able to grow their revenue base through new clients. And there was another company for whom that applied, which was Computer Associates, CA. They used to be the second largest software company in the world, but once the mainframes disappeared, they fell by the wayside. Similarly with Micro Focus, although for slightly different reasons. So these large software firms do disappear. They get subsumed and absorbed, and the rump of which, continues to support clients. As I said, I think SAP will continue in its current guise almost indefinitely, but whether or not it will be, with everybody happy on their new SAP S6 HANA platform or S7 HANA platform, I'm quite skeptical.
Yeah, I am too. And we just see too many pissed off clients throughout Europe and other parts of the world, that customers of SAP, people that are saying, we don't want to do it. And the ones that are doing it, a lot of them are saying we're doing it because we have to. And, of course, the question we ask is, but do you? Why? Why do you think you have to? Of course, SAP is going to try and convince you have to, but that's not necessarily true.
Well, the The other problem as well is that SAP's terms for HANA, their general terms and conditions for cloud services, section 9.1.1-B, is massively more egregious than terms that clients will already be on. So that particular section in UK law says that a company has unlimited liability for license true-ups. And SAP, again, partly in order to prop up their revenues, have been extraordinarily aggressive with their licensing true-ups, to the extent that Diageo, the drinks company, got fined £57 million through litigation by SAP for licensing where they gave access to SAP data via Salesforce, and they bought an integration license, and SAP argued successfully in court that every end user should have a license to access that data, and that cost Diageo millions. And so you can see the behavior that SAP is doing to shore up its business, but also by tightening and making more egregious its licensing terms, it's actually turning customers away. I had a customer very recently who were on the verge of getting SAP because it was an easier migration, looking at the license terms going, actually, do you know what? No, we're going to go a different way because we cannot sign our business up to something that is a material risk that we would have to report in the annual accounts. And because they were a private equity based firm, they just said, no, can't do it. And so SAP effectively excluded themselves just from their own terms and conditions. So that's really interesting. I mean, there's a real market dynamic that sits behind that says, if you are in that much of a dominant position, you are the easiest to fall because you are the one sitting highest up the pyramid, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I want to come back to this EU investigation, I guess you'd call it, into potential antitrust behavior by SAP, because this is a really big deal. And we actually covered this in our last week's podcast.
Yeah.
You can find that episode 244 of Transformation Ground Control. Just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you don't already subscribe, you can get all the past episodes. You'll see episode 244 has the episode where we talk to an attorney and to a third-party maintenance provider of SAP. And we talk about this whole EU thing in a lot of detail last episode. But I think, getting back to the topic at hand here today, I think one of the reasons why, not only because we have an office and a presence and clients and a team in Europe, that's part of why we wanted to have this conversation today, but also because I think in a lot of ways, EU sets the tone for how regulations are going to look worldwide, for better or for worse. Whether you like it or not is a whole nother story, but EU does seem to be ahead of the curve in terms of setting the framework that a lot of other governments and regulatory bodies throughout the world will end up following. Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying other governments are now going to sue SAP for antitrust behavior, but I think my personal opinion is
I would be surprised if the US states didn't start, because this is a bigger problem for a manufacturer who uses SAP in the US as it is for a European company. And you're right to say that what Europe tends to do first, like GDPR and the whole private personal identifiable information legislation, you now see that in Canada and Florida and New York, and it's starting to become more pervasive across the US. So I am expecting that to happen. I think, though, on the SAP side, what we're also seeing is a change in customer behaviors. These large customers are just not willing to get knocked about by SAP. They're not willing to be bullied, and so they are putting their foot down. And they're just not playing SAP's game, and that's a real problem for SAP. And the problem is that when you get into a dominant position, you get into a dominant position mindset, which, as I said, was the mindset IBM were in the early 90s. And the executives, it becomes a bad marriage. It's incredibly difficult to shift that mindset to be more agile and to be more customer centric and yada, 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 which is, never really been SAP's strong point, but absolutely is not SAP's strong point recently in the last 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here with Stuart, Robb. We're talking about the state of digital transformation in Europe. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood. Feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 245. My name is Eric Kimberlin. You can find new episodes of the show every week at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group and produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help you with your digital transformation initiatives, feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. And if you'd like to learn more about Major Tom Productions and how you can collaborate with us on some of our content, be sure to reach out to us. I've included contact information below for that as well. So we're here with Stuart. We're talking about the state of digital transformation in Europe. We're getting a lot of really good comments and questions in the chat here. So I'm going to just keep pulling up some of the comments here. Andy on LinkedIn says, if they go after SAP in an antitrust suit, then they'll have to go after Oracle as well. And that is an impossible battle for the EU to win. Larry Ellison has rather deep pockets. I don't know.
Putin is far richer than Ellison and Elon Musk put together, according to Elon Musk. So I think the EU's got a few quid if it wants. I don't think this is a question of pockets. I think this is a question of regulation. But the truth is that the difference between SAP and Oracle is that Oracle are not crowding out their customer base and pushing them and punching them to do something they don't want to do.
I agree. I was just gonna say
as soon as Oracle start that behavior, then you'll see an equivalent backlash. I'm quite certain.
Yeah, you might. I think you'd be more likely to see it with like Microsoft, maybe partly because the EU's already had successful cases against Microsoft in the past for consumer-facing technology, and that's the thing we talked about last week. By the way, is if we were in a consumer-facing space, this ERP space that we're in right now, the digital transformation space, this would have been regulated long ago. But we're still in the wild, wild west. Tech companies can do whatever they want and they can get away with it. But now all of a sudden the EU is saying, well, maybe not. Maybe you're not going to get away with it. And I actually think it's a good thing because I think it'll force not just SAP, but other big tech providers to look at what they're doing. And see.
I mean, I looked up in Europe recently how many big cases there have been against Microsoft for things like true ups and, breach of license terms. And do you know how many I found?
How many?
None.
Yeah.
So there's a real psychological difference. But now I think Microsoft realize they're missing a trick because they are starting to do true ups now. But Microsoft are a far easier company to deal with in that respect. I mean, I have a little saying that SAP terms and conditions are unreasonable and Microsoft's are unfathomable and Oracle's are both. And out of all of the three legal departments that I deal with, by far and away the worst to deal with is Oracle, actually. But Microsoft generally are just happy to get the money, right? And the number of court cases there are against Microsoft or Microsoft against clients is vanishingly small compared to the number against SAP and then to a lesser extent Oracle. So again, there's a different psychology about how those organizations go about their business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think SAP is sort of taking it to the extreme, and others are starting to follow some of their plays and their playbooks. But I think SAP, and it's also the big behemoth. They're the easiest one to pick on if you're a regulator because they're so big, and so I can see why SAP is the target here.
Well, and SAP's in Europe, right? It's headquartered in Germany. So if you're in Europe, that's an easy target because they're right in your back pocket jurisdiction, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's also, isn't it the EU's most highly valued company, or definitely tech company? I don't know if it's the
Yes, most highly valued tech company. Yeah, no, it's a long way from being the most highly valued EU company.
Yeah, yeah.
That's Third Stage Consulting Europe's most highly.
I mean, I know. I just didn't want to brag about it. So here's an interesting. Speaking of Oracle, and I apologize, I don't see who put this, but this is on LinkedIn. It says, interestingly, workflow systems layered on top of ERP systems to automate the tedious work are popular in the UK. There are more Oracle Apex developers in the UK and Europe than in the US, I would venture to say.
Yeah.
You've seen?
Yes. No, absolutely. And that, funny enough, we have clients. In fact, we were talking to a potential client last week. A lot of the Oracle Fusion, or whatever they call their product suite today, the actual manufacturing side of Oracle Fusion really has quite a poor success rate. And so we do see a lot of layered, and people going, okay, we give up on Fusion directly for manufacturing, and we'll layer other applications on the top to do the MRP side of things, and we'll just do ERP for Oracle. And in fact, one of my people, Dominic, is in a client at the moment unwinding an Oracle Fusion project that's gone wrong and putting in a MRP on the top of Oracle to solve that exact problem. So yes, that's definitely a truism.
Yeah. And here's a follow-up comment. I think it's from the same person because, I don't see the name. And you might appreciate this British history, Stuart. But the current head of Oracle Apex, which is Oracle's AI vibe coding platform, is Simon Hunt. He was formerly at the British Army for 20 plus years doing Apex apps. He won a medal for it, I believe, the Victoria Cross, for how much he saved them, avoiding the rip and replace approach other vendors were pushing. So
I don't think we give Victoria Crosses for extreme bravery in the front of Oracle, but if we do, I'm fascinated.
I don't know, what is the Victoria Cross model for those of us that are not?
The Victoria Cross is something we give for extreme bravery and things like World War One, when you go over the top and try and run straight towards the enemy without being fearful.
Yeah, he might have. I mean,
he might have got a medal for conspicuous bravery, I'm sure, but I'm not certain it was for going in front of Oracle and using their Apex apps. I think
unless his life was at risk, which I wouldn't be surprised if someone's life was at risk for. Because sometimes I wonder, like, is SAP going to send out some henchmen after me or something? Because I always talk about, how SAP does things I don't like. But
yeah, well, yeah.
So I've got to poke the bear a little bit here, Stuart, because the good thing about knowing you so well for so long is I know what some of your triggers are, and I'm going to trigger you here. And this is not it. Oh, shoot. There's so many really good questions that now I lost it. Here it is. So this is from another LinkedIn person that I don't see the name. It says, have companies in the UK and Europe genuinely integrated AI into their ERP systems, or is it still more experimental?
No.
I mean, surely AI is going to solve all this, right? I mean,
no. So I follow AI very closely, and I have been doing for a number of years. And it's quite interesting. There's a very, very good YouTube scientist, Sabine. Her name begins with H. I can't remember the name. When I find it, I'll put it up. But she takes all the latest scientific and tech announcements, and she really drills into them and really pulls them apart from a very, 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 very technical perspective. So she gets right into the weeds on quantum computing and whether it really works, and starts talking about Schrodinger's cat and stuff like that. Very interesting. But one of the interesting ones that she came up with recently is that some research has recently been published that says AI LLMs can never be genuinely intelligent because they can never be beyond language models, and where the way that human brains reason is not purely based on language. It's based on a whole variety of other inputs and processes, and we see this in chatbots. Okay, and let's just say AI for what it is, right? We had big data, and big data promised everything. Okay, that was going to solve our world. And then when that kind of ran out of steam, we needed something else to sell. So then we leapt in and we went, I know, let's sell AI. And we did that before. We did that with CRM, and we did it before with open systems, and we did it before with distributed computing. And we've done it over and over and over again. So let's just call it out for what it is. This is the big tech firms churning the base to take some more money out of the private equity market. That's what's going on here, right? And so PE people will become very rich, and one or two of these tech companies like Nvidia will become very, very rich. And then in 20 years' time, they'll have disappeared, or 30 years' time, they'll have disappeared. We'll never hear from them again. So that's my rant over. So answering the question now, there are some very, very interesting things that AI can do in the consumer space. So if I want to see Captain Picard on Star Trek dressed in a communist commissar's uniform and being in charge of the USSR Enterprise, and it's a video and it looks amazing, then that AI is brilliant at that. Now, what use that is, I'm not quite sure, but in terms of developing deepfakes and all of that, it's amazing. When you get to chatbots, it's absolutely useless, because as soon as you need to do anything complicated, like change your phone number on Amazon, or today I was trying to get my no claims bonus out of an insurance company for my car, complete failure, absolutely, totally, utterly useless. Whenever I see the word virtual assistant, my heart sinks, because I know I'm going to waste 20 minutes of my life before I get to speak to someone that can actually do what I want in 5 seconds. Why? Because large language models do not reason. They merely take language and predict what the next thing is going to be said. So if I say, I'd like to order, and you have to predict the next words, if I'm in a restaurant, it could be, I'd like to order food, or I'd like to order drinks, or I'd like to order fish, or I'd like to order you outside and go away, please.
Yeah.
And it's all a ranking. It's more likely if you're in a fish restaurant that you'd say, I want to order fish, than it is you'd say, I'd like to order you to go outside. Okay. But that's all it's doing. It's predicting language. It's not actually reasoning. It's not actually understanding that, fish is only on Friday. It doesn't have that contextual understanding. And that's why quite a lot of AI, when you ask it a question, whether it's Copilot or Gork or all these other ones, get the answer wrong. Not because they've got the answer wrong, it's because they've learnt the answer from the internet that has, according to Jeremy Clarkson, 11 billion facts, of which 20 billion are all wrong, and that's where it's got its information from. So, of course, it's going to be wrong. And we see this over and over again. There was a case of a guy who asked for a medical treatment for something, and the AI told him it was sodium carbonate, not sodium chloride, or something like that, because that was what its model had learned. The fact that whatever this was, it wasn't sodium carbonate, but it was something similar, was toxic, was the AI had no idea. But as a result, the guy was properly hospitalized. That was in last week. That was 2 weeks, actually 2 weeks ago. There's a classic case of the AI that made up or hallucinated, which is another word for telling rubbish, a load of court cases, and quoting them in a court case that went to a judge in the US, and the law firm got slated for it because none of this case law existed. And part of the reason for that is that AI has no ability to say, I don't know. And whenever you ask a question, it never says, I don't know. And because it can never say, I don't know, it can only ever be wrong. Because if it's right, it doesn't know. But if it's wrong, it doesn't know either. So
it's a good point.
It's like asking a particularly ignorant child to explain what Schrodinger's cat is, right? It could read it off a book, but it would have no concept of what being dead and alive at the same time is. In fact, even I struggle with that. And I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And I thought that was hard going. But it's there's no conceptual understanding. So AI can never do what people think it can do. And the realization is slowly coming. Now, can it do really interesting stuff in ERP? Yes, it can. I mean, I was I was at Deloitte a couple of days ago, and we were talking about some of the stuff where AI has use cases in ERP, and where that's been really successful. And it's in revenue modeling, it's in accounts receivable. It's obviously AI in accounts payable has been around for ages because we've had scanning invoices, we've had three-way matching. And that is a conceptual AI, but without the large language model. So it really depends on what your definition of AI is. But have we got to the stage in ERP yet where we can have the equivalent of Captain Picard in a communist uniform commanding the USSR Enterprise? I think we're a long way away. And I think the problem actually is having the idea about what is good. And I think it's probably more likely that in demand forecasting and anything that requires data analysis and hypotheses based on data analysis is going to be a better use case than, you know, trying to change your Amazon phone number, because, as I said, the chatbots that do that at the moment are still worse than useless.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. All those are great points. And I think one of the problems we see is that cloud ERP and AI are delivering a sort of 1-2 punch to the market in terms of if I'm an organization that wants to leverage AI, I'm being told by the industry that in order to get all this magic of AI, even though it's not magical to your point, but I'm being sold this bill of goods of AI being a magical tool that'll solve all my problems. And by the way, the only way you can get AI is if you move all your applications to our newest cloud solution, like S/4HANA or D365 or whatever.
There's a great scene in The Wolf of Wall Street where Leonardo DiCaprio is in the restaurant with Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey is going, it's a fugazi, it's a way of taking money out of the client's pocket and putting it in your pocket. It doesn't exist. And that's what AI is at the moment. It's a way of getting money out of private equity and money out of clients for stuff that doesn't exist, or at least doesn't provide significant amounts of business value. So if you're going to do anything with AI, be really, really, really clear how, you know, you start with a business problem that AI really clearly solves for this amount of money. And if you've got that value chain really well defined, well, then maybe it's worth a punt. But at the moment, I wouldn't invest 20 quid in it. I just think it's valueless.
Yeah, definitely not long term. Plus, you don't know how many, to your point earlier, you don't know how many of these AI providers are going to be around in 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah, and the ones that are good will emerge.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it's like, is it likely that I will be the next Amazon because I bet on an AI firm at the moment? Well, possibly, but I haven't seen any examples of anything where investing in that technology is the next big thing. It's all a bit promising and it's all a bit interesting, but it's not knocking my socks off in terms of revolution. I mean, even when Amazon started, nobody could ever have predicted that a small bookseller with a rather nifty app would turn out to run virtually half the world's, you know, infrastructure applications and digital ID and all the rest of it. I mean, that's just like was completely not predicted. So, you know.
Yeah. Good. Very true. Speaking of the future and predictions, what do you see as the future for tier 1 consulting firms?
I'm a lot less skeptical than most. There's a few things happening at the moment, right? AI is not replacing tier 1 consulting firms. That is absolute rubbish. No matter what certain people who want to drum up that particular narrative are aiming for. That's not what I deal with. The tier 1s a lot. I was with Deloitte a few days ago. I was with Accenture last week, and there is a definite slowdown in consulting firms recruiting out of universities. And that's got nothing to do with AI producing brilliant test strategies. It's complete noise. It's because consulting is going through its usual cycle of boom and bust, and it's going through a slow growth cycle. And so it's not recruiting, and it's also laying a lot of people off. It's done that 20 times before. It'll do it 20 times again. The other thing is that there are two classes of people in tier one firms. I mean, not in firms like ours, but in tier one firms, you have the careerists, and then you have the exceptionals. And the careerists are people who are on the bench. They get put into a client, and they do effectively the job that the client could do if the client had the money, the capacity and resources. And they tend to be a bit better than average. So if you get a quote functional consultant from Deloitte or from Accenture or from KPMG, they will be 20% better than if you got one off the contractor market, but that's about it, right? But they will move between tier one firms, or most probably they will move into the client at some point, or even out of the industry. Then there are the exceptionals, and the exceptionals are the ones who fast track their way through the tier ones and get to be director or partner, associate partner really quickly. And that's because they're exceptional. And those are the people you want on your engagement. You don't want the fodder and the bench. You want the exceptionals, because the exceptionals add value, and they are not going to be replaced by AI, because they have experience, they have people skills, they have ability to communicate, they have a whole raft of attributes and knowledge that is not going to get replaced by AI. And they are able to bring a concept to a client and say, this is what we think, this is our point of view, this is what we think you should do, and it will land. And McKinsey's been doing that, and Boston Consulting and Deloitte and Accenture and KPMG have been, and PwC, all of those have that tier of people, and they do it very well. And those people are not going anywhere. They might have less people underneath them, but that's because, you know, that they can subcontract some of that that what I call the fodder, the you know, the careerists. But the requirement for strong, knowledgeable advice is going to be there forever. So in fact, in many respects, I see tier one firms becoming more like third stage, which is, you know, we have exceptional people, but we only have exceptional people. We don't have careerists, because our value is in giving that really, really, really high quality advice and guidance and getting it right first time. And AI doesn't do that.
Yeah. And Andy on LinkedIn has a question or a comment that I'm curious to know if it pertains to the EU or to Europe and UK as well. But Andy says tier one firms are now realizing they don't have the skills they need, so they're on a major acquisition drive. For example, Accenture bought a litany of Oracle Fusion tier 2 SIs here in the US. Is that something you're seeing in Europe as well?
No, but not quite for that reason. I mean, Europe's economic cycle is not great at the moment. The Ukraine situation has been quite a drag on Europe. So there's quite a significant amount of economic uncertainty. In the UK, certainly also we have significantly higher taxes, and that's reducing investment. So, there's even been a couple of new consulting firms that call themselves tier one start up, and they've rapidly disappeared without a trace. So what we think we're seeing more in the UK, certainly, and in Europe, is a consolidation. And although they're getting rid of some of the lower tiers, they're not buying firms. A lot of them are continuing to reinforce their Indian offshore operations, Philippines, and India. But I haven't certainly seen significant activity from any of the partners buying out tier two firms. It's just not a model that I think is currently in vogue in the UK at the moment,
Right.
or in Europe.
Yeah. What about the trend that we're starting to see it in some parts of the world, but I'm curious, in Europe and UK, are you seeing a trend away from the monolithic ERP model towards the more composable ERP model, or what are you seeing there, if anything?
I mean, look, there's Workday for HR, there's SAP Oracle for core ERP. Then when you get into the sort of the slightly smaller sub-billion, you get Microsoft F&O, you get NetSuite, and then you go down again to Business Central, and those are still pretty much bread and butter. I mean, you get the occasional, left wingers who go for Odoo, and some of the more, the left field.
So not left wingers like politically left. You're
No,
saying.
I don't. The people who are just like not more out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
No, I mean the top 10 is still a top 10, right? In for Epicor, again, very heavily used in MRP. If you don't want SAP, Epicor is a really, really good alternative. So is Plex. So I would say still 90% of all the clients we deal with still don't deal, probably even outside the top 5, let alone the top 10. I mean, now every PE firm you walk into will be going, what are we going, Business Central or NetSuite? I mean, Are we doing Workday, or are we doing one of the, HiBob? So again, there's a conservatism in Europe, particularly because I think Europe recognizes there's no real substantial benefit in going out on a limb unless you've got some real odd use case that gives you a real big business benefit. And because I think our boards tend to be more conservative, they tend to take less risk, and therefore they'll go with the sheep unless there's a really, 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 really good reason to go and lead the pack.
Right. Yeah, to be on that bleeding edge, or to test in a lesser proven model, or whatever the case may be.
Or take one of the ones that not everybody's heard of. I mean, the other thing as well is, if you take one of the ones that nobody's heard of, not only has nobody heard of it, but it's really hard to recruit for it as well, whether either it's implementation or in actually operating it. If you need an AP consultant in Lemon Tree, which is a Finnish ERP, well, you can go to Finland, and then that's about it. That's about the only country that knows how to use it. So you're stuck.
Yeah. I had not heard of that system. So that.
Well, there's over 1,000 ERPs. I mean, if you actually count them up, there's thousands of them. But you've only heard of 10.
Right. There's a reason for that in many cases.
There's a reason for that. Of course there is. Yeah. I mean, I actually met somebody a few years ago who wanted me to invest in his ERP. And it was a ERP specializing in hat makers.
Wow.
Now,
how many of those are there in the world?
Well, in the particular area of the woods that he came from, I can't remember what it was now. It might have been Nottingham, but there were it was the centre of hat making in Britain, like from 1800 until whatever. And he'd written this ERP especially for hats, and thought it was a great thing to go and sell. And I'm like, yeah, but who am I selling it to outside of this tiny area of Britain? I mean, it doesn't even support multi-language, so I can't even sell it to France. So it's there are lots and lots of ERPs, but as I go back to what I said earlier, most of an ERP system is adding up and taking away.
Right. So last question I have for you, just to put a bow on this conversation. I appreciate you being here today and sharing the geographic nuances and the cultural nuances of what you're seeing in digital transformations in the region there. But what if you had to give one piece of advice to European business leaders that are embarking on a digital transformation in 2025 into 2026? What's the simple advice you'd leave them with? Not simple to execute, but the summary of what you would advise them to do.
Controversially, I'd say wait.
Yeah.
If there's no compelling reason to move at the moment, there's a huge amount of volatility in the technology. There's a huge amount of economic volatility. And whilst I'd love to take your money and have your business, if I was in your chair, I would probably just sit on it for 6 months or so and see where everything's going.
Yeah.
Because if we have a collapse in the economy like we had in 2008, or if SAP go out of business, or whatever the wild thing that happens is, I'd much rather be prepared for that and have not done anything precipitous. I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Rather than embark on something now and then realize in 6 months' time that I've just finished the company that I'm running because I've invested in something that's going nowhere.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think if you talk to an industry analyst or a lot of the different technologists in the space, they'll tell you that's just, you're going to get left behind. You're going to build up your technical debt. You're going to, they'll use all these buzzwords to make you feel inferior.
Yeah, and yet you look at GlaxoSmithKline and they're running on SAP. They think parts of SmithKline are running in ECC5 and they're still running very happily. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how much people love some of these legacy systems, like ECC in particular. I think that's, in some ways, these tech companies, if their success has led to problems they're having now, in that ECC is a pretty good system. I mean, I think,
it's a very good system. I mean, why change it? What possible reason have I got for changing it when everyone that works in my company knows how to use it? It works faultlessly, or as close to faultlessly as required. And I'm not changing my business significantly enough to warrant the change.
Yeah.
Especially not if I'm a multinational pharma company. Why would I take the risk?
Well, especially if you've customized the software, you've built up all this IP, that's your intellectual property. You've built it in the system. And now the tech companies are trying to get you to throw that out the window and say, forget that. We've got best practices. We know better than you how your business should run. I think that's one of the big challenges.
Yeah. Well, I'm not buying. And I don't think that's why many of the CEOs are not buying either. And I think that's why we've got an EU antitrust thing going on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And I think if you do wait, waiting doesn't necessarily mean do nothing. I mean, there's so much you can do with your current environment. You could look at how you could optimize and get more value out of it. You could stabilize it. You could
process improvement, cost optimization, revenue enhancement, go back to basics. Stop looking at the tech, look at your business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's too easy to get lost in the technology the way things are going right now. But all right, great conversation. Thank you, Stuart. Always good to have you on the show, and great questions from the audience. We had a really engaged crowd here today, engaged group here today. A lot of questions we didn't get to, so we're going to cover a couple of those questions here in just a moment after we take a quick break, and then we'll get into how to identify red flags in your project before they become too big of a problem. So stick around. We've got a lot more to cover here in episode 245 of Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown: Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 245. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, so be sure to reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about how we can help your digital transformation initiatives. And so, Darian, we just had Stuart on the show talking about digital transformations in Europe. What were some of your thoughts and follow-up questions from that conversation?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. You guys really dived into a lot of different areas. I definitely have some follow-up questions. I know the audience had a lot of questions that, like you said, you guys didn't get to. So I have a couple follow-up questions as well. First one being, you guys talked about the role of third-party maintenance and what third-party maintenance even is and different options, stuff like that. But can you guys, or can Eric, you explain what, for organizations that are maybe unfamiliar with third-party maintenance, what does it actually provide that the vendor support doesn't?
Yeah, so first of all, it's not so much that they provide support that the vendor won't. It's providing comparable support that the vendor would also provide. But the key is that it's a third party, so it's not necessarily a party that's trying to convince you to upgrade technologies or whatever. So there can be some value there. That's more of an intangible value. But the tangible value of moving to a third party system, in addition to the fact that these third party providers are offering longer term support than the vendors themselves in many cases, the real tangible value is the cost savings, because a lot of times the third party maintenance is going to be a lot less expensive. It's sort of like getting your oil changed on your car. If you take it to the car dealership where you bought the car, you're probably going to pay a bit more, but you're probably going to get a pretty comparable oil change. I know I don't notice when my dealer does it versus when a third party does my oil change. It still runs the same and it's a lot cheaper. So anyway, so it's a lot like that. I mean, you've just got to look at, if you feel comfortable and you just prefer to have the vendor providing support, then by all means have at it. If you want to save money and you want a longer term roadmap for how you could have that third party support, then maybe a third party provider would be better. So I think you just have to look at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to talk about some intellectual property and customization that you guys were touching on, when a company customizes its ERP to fit its business perfectly, that is in technical debt, or is that technical debt or intellectual property?
I guess technically it's probably both. I mean, in some cases, yes, it could be technical debt. But in more cases than not, we see organizations and we look at the customization they've done, and there's a lot of intellectual property there. I mean, what I mean by intellectual property is it's your business. It's the way you run your operations. It's unique to you. It's hopefully a competitive advantage. It's a reason why you win against your competitors, et cetera, et cetera. In the tech space, though, software vendors have a way of belittling those things and suggesting that they're bad. In the tech world, customization is bad. Old technology is bad. New technology is good. No customization is good. It's sort of like this binary either or. You're either good or bad, and you don't want to be bad, do you? You want to be good. And so you end up saying, okay, then I guess I'll just go clean core with a new system. I'll get rid of all that customization. I'll just follow quote unquote best practices because the vendor knows better. I mean, to me, it's just it's a problem, I think, because I think a lot of companies are going to find in years soon that they have lost a lot of that intellectual property. They've lost a lot of flexibility and agility, and they're paying the price for it in other ways. So I think, and quite frankly, too, I think that's why so many companies are resisting the idea of upgrading to the latest and greatest cloud solution, because they know they have all this IP tied up in their old system and they like it, and it's easy for us to sit here as outside people and judge them and say you shouldn't have customized the software, you should just used it the way it worked. Well, that's a pretty arrogant way to look at it, in my opinion. That's a technologist that doesn't understand business. If you're going to sit here and say that you should absolutely not customize software, you need to follow our best practices, because let's face it, I mean, SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, none of those guys know your business better than you do. They can say they do all they want, but they don't. They try to build the most scalable product that's, sort of a watered down solution that can be everything to everyone. And it's just not going to be everything to everyone. And you're going to have big gaps in that model. I'm not saying don't pursue that model, but just recognize it for what it is. And let's not call it something let's not make it your problem and, accuse you of being resistant to change because you don't want to upgrade to a system that maybe isn't an upgrade after all.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question from this conversation. Is it time, you think, to rethink what end of life, quote unquote, really means for enterprise software?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, there is no end of life. I mean, you have to look at the words that technology vendors use. I mean, these are very carefully, and I know this may sound like a random tangent, but it's really important because there's a science to the words that vendors use, and the science is intended to suggest that there's only one possible answer, and that one possible answer is to buy their technology. I already mentioned the fact that there's sort of this good or bad language in, things around like technical debt. Right there, that's a strong insinuation that if you have technical debt because you have a system that's 5 or 10 or 20 years old, that's debt that you need to repay now. And to me, it blows my mind that actually works, but it sticks. You hear CIOs all the time that say, well, we've got technical debt. We've got to get rid of that technical debt now and go to the new, the latest and greatest. And, I'm always, we at Third Stage, being tech agnostic, are always the ones that say, you don't have to. Why? Why do you think you have to? And what does technical debt really mean? If it's working for you and you're getting a lot of ROI out of that investment that you've already paid for, why? I mean, do you really need to upgrade to the latest and greatest? So words like technical debt, best practices, clean core is a newer one that SAP's come up with. It just absolutely drives me crazy because, again, the word clean, you want a clean core, right? You don't want a dirty core. And the insinuation there is don't customize. Customization is bad. You need it to be clean. Move over to our clean system that, by the way, you can't really customize the way you want to, but it's okay because it's clean and it has best practices. So the words matter. And I think that's one thing we have to look at is just recognize it for what it is and sort of look through the marketing hype there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was such a great conversation overall, and always a great time when Stuart comes on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, good stuff. Well, we're going to shift gears now and talk about red flags that you can be looking for in your digital transformation, the warning signs, the pitfalls. We're going to dive into that here. We're going to show you a YouTube video clip here, and then we'll dive into some discussion afterwards. So let's roll the clip and we'll come back and talk about it. One of the fastest growing practices within Third Stage Consulting is the project recovery area of our business. This is where we go into projects that have struggled, that or in some cases have already failed. Maybe they've been put on hold because there were such big problems with those projects. And in other more extreme cases, we also have expert witness work that we do. We'll go in and help lawyers figure out what happened in these projects, what the failure points are, and then the lawyers fight over whose fault that all is. The reason I bring all this up is because we see a lot of common patterns and we see a very consistent process that works really well for not only analyzing troubled projects, but also identifying risk and mitigating those risks and getting the projects back on track. And it's one of these things where a lot of times organizations double down when they start to get in trouble. They get told by their system integrator and the software vendor that everything's fine, this is just a normal part of the process. And in some ways, yeah, these are messy projects, but they don't need to be as messy as most of them are. And so having independent tech agnostic advice and a gut check on making sure these projects are on track and you do the right things to remediate them is something that's very important. So what I want to do today is walk you through a framework that we use, very simple multi-step process that we use to help assess and remediate projects that are off track. And that's what I want to share with you here today. Now, if you'd like to learn more about lessons from other digital transformations and some of the takeaways that you can apply to your project, be sure to read our ebook called Lessons from 1000 Digital Transformations. You can find that by scanning the QR code right here, or you can use the links below. The first step in recovering a troubled or failed ERP implementation is to assess the current situation. You want to look at what's been done so far, because chances are pretty high that you've done some really good things and your team has probably created some collateral and inputs and deliverables that you can reuse. And there's going to be other things that maybe aren't as valuable, or things where the team has gotten off track. But the key here is to recognize and differentiate between the two, because you don't want to completely abandon the project as it's been so far necessarily. And you don't necessarily want to assume that everything you've done is appropriate or something that you can keep using going forward. So the key here is to look at what did we do well, what haven't we done well, and what are the key takeaways and observations from that. So just to give you an example of more details of how we do that, I'm going to flash on the screen here for you our quality assurance framework that we use here at Third Stage Consulting. As you can see in this graphic, there's 13 different areas that we typically will evaluate a digital transformation depending on what stage in the project they are. And we actually use this same framework whether we're starting a project from the very beginning with a client, whether we're remediating a troubled project, or if we're analyzing a failure in relation to a lawsuit, we'll use the same framework. So it's very battle tested, and it's something we use with our own clients when we start with them. And as you can see in this graphic, there's many different areas and different lenses that we'll typically analyze these projects through. So we'll look at the technical aspects, we'll look at a lot of the change management, the human sides of change. We'll look at the program management, we'll look at the architecture and integration, we'll look at process improvement, overall alignment. Those are the types of things we look at. And the whole idea here is to give us a health check of what's going well, what's not. And inevitably, you end up with a laundry list of a lot of different things that you're not doing well, that you could be doing better. And you'll also have a laundry list of things that you've done well that you want to keep doing. So the key is to take that time out, to pause, to slow down, take a deep breath, and objectively look at the status of the project and really get to the root cause of why the project has gotten to where it is. I mentioned a moment ago that during the initial assessment of the project, we want to identify work that you want to preserve. And this is worth calling out and diving into in a bit more detail, because a lot of times what happens in these projects is people get really demoralized. They feel like the project is completely off track, which maybe it is, but they don't see a path forward on how to get it back on track, and they feel like all the work they've done to date is a total waste of time. And what we typically find in these projects is that that's usually not the case. Usually the case is that, yeah, there's some things you didn't do well, you could have done better, but there's also a lot of things that have been done well. It's almost like you've got all these pieces of a puzzle in front of you, and the team has created a lot of those pieces of the puzzle. They are actually part of the puzzle. They're important pieces, but they haven't figured out how to put it all together yet. So we have to identify what are those pieces of the puzzle that are valid and legitimate, but we just haven't figured out how to put them together yet. And how can we build on those and continue the momentum from that? And by doing that, a really important dynamic that it creates is that it makes people feel better. They feel like, okay, this wasn't a total waste of time. We just need to pivot here, and we need to refocus our efforts and leverage what we've done, make it better, that sort of thing. And that has a huge impact on the organization. The worst thing you can do is say, we're completely abandoning everything we did. We're going to find a new vendor. We're going to start the whole project over, or worse yet, we're just going to do nothing because this was a failure. That's the most demoralizing thing you could do. And that typically only happens in the most extreme cases. We rarely see situations where we even advise a client that, hey, you picked the wrong software. You completely screwed this up so badly that you might as well just start over. That's usually not the case. The more likely case is you've done a lot of good things. You haven't done everything perfectly, but let's focus on that foundation. Let's isolate those things that are good deliverables, good work product that we can build on. Let's set aside the other things that maybe weren't so good, and let's pivot and build on those things and move on from there. The next step in the process is to identify and prioritize failure points. What are the root causes for why the project has either failed, gotten off track, become troubled, whatever it is? And usually there's a handful of things that are the real root causes, and there's a ton of symptoms on top of that. And usually that laundry list of root causes and symptoms is so great that there's no way you're going to tackle all that stuff overnight. You're not going to boil the ocean and fix everything that's taken months or years to get to this point. You're not going to change that overnight. But what we can do is pick off the handful of things that have the most impact to the success of the project. And again, we want to get down to the root cause, because a lot of times it's not the symptoms we want to fix. We want to get to those smaller subset of root causes. What are those things that we're doing that are causing all the other symptoms? For example, one of the common ones we see is that the team is not aligned. They're not in sync on what this project is, how it should be managed, how business processes should be defined, who should approve business processes, how much testing we should do, how much change we're willing to take on. all these major strategic questions oftentimes lead to different answers within the organization. And oftentimes that is the root cause of why all these other things happened. Another example is when we don't invest in change management. If we don't focus enough on helping people navigate change, what ends up happening is you start to see other symptoms. Like, for example, the team pushes back on the out-of-the-box functionality of technology and they want to over-customize the software. Well, on the surface, you may say, well, we'll just tell them not to over-customize the software. But you're missing the point there. That's not the real problem. The real problem is we didn't manage change well, and we don't have a clear change strategy and plan, so we need to fix that. So that's an example of where we might prioritize and say, we're not going to worry too much about customization right now. We're going to focus on the root cause of managing change, and then we'll get to the customization stuff later, because that's simply a byproduct of a deeper problem. So identifying and prioritizing is key to help you focus, get the low-hanging fruit, and get to the root cause of what it's going to take to make the project successful. Now, once you've evaluated a project, you've gotten a health check, you've assessed everything, you've prioritized the root causes of what's causing the challenges in the project, now you create the go-forward plan. This is where we say we've identified the problems, now we need a solution. We need to remediate. And oftentimes what this means is you might have to completely reset some of the things that you didn't do well early in the project, and you may need to pause and put on hold some of the technical activities. And this is where it gets tricky, because your software vendor and your system integrator does not like that when you do that. But for a lot of clients, that's the thing to do, is you put them on hold and say, hold on, technology is the least of our worries right now. Let's go fix these root causes that we've identified in our assessment. For example, if our team still is not on the same page with how much we want to standardize our business processes across a global organization, for example, if we're still not on the same page with that, we need to stop the technology piece of it, because that's just complicating things. We need to figure out first what the situation is and how we want our processes to look, get on the same page, then we can revert back to focusing on technology and some of the other aspects of the project. But until we address that key root cause, we're just wasting time, and we're likely to create more problems by focusing on some of the other tactical things. So that go-forward remediation plan is very critical, and it's important to have someone that can objectively look at this for you, because again, your software vendor and your system integrator are both highly likely to tell you things are fine, this is normal, let's just keep going, we'll deal with that in phase 2, or during hypercare, we'll fix all that stuff. You need to look past that and understand that they have an incentive, an economic incentive, to ensure you keep the project going from their perspective. And you will keep the project going, you just might do it without them for a short period of time. And you need to focus on what it's going to take to remediate the real root causes of the project. So that was our discussion about some of the red flags to watch for, some of the pitfalls and warning signs to watch for in digital transformation failure. I'm curious to hear in the comments, which of these resonate with you, or which ones you might be seeing in your digital transformation project that you might be involved with right now. But Darian, what were your thoughts and follow-up questions from that conversation?
Yeah, I love this video, Eric, on the topic. I think it was really insightful. And overall, I think the warning signs that you're heading for trouble that you mentioned were really helpful to look for, especially like couple like the testing finds process gaps that no one owns to resolve, or like decisions logs are long and decisions are late, different things like that can signal that maybe you're heading for trouble. But a couple follow-up questions from this video. How do you quantify readiness so steering committees can greenlight stage gate objectively?
That's a tricky one, because what should you be measuring and how you should be measuring it are both important. So the what you should be measuring is, all the minimum success factors or the minimum criteria you should have met before you feel comfortable going live. So that would be things like, you fully tested the system, you've done full user acceptance testing, and it's passed user acceptance testing X number of times. What percentage of people have been trained on the new system? What percentage of people have demonstrated competency in the system? How many defects are still existing? That sort of thing. So you look at quantifiable things like that. The problem, though, that you face is it's the qualitative stuff that gets really tricky, because you might on one hand say, well, 100% of the team has gone through training, so therefore we are ready. Well, that doesn't capture the fact that the training sucked. The training was awful, and it doesn't reflect our actual business or the way we configured the system. But yeah, we trained them on how to use a version of the software, just not our version. So it's misleading to say it's 100% a success rate, and you have to peel back the layers of the onion or look under the hood and say, well, what was the training? And that's where the art and the qualitative measures have to come in. And this is where quite frankly, this is where vendors mislead their customers a lot of the time, because they'll say, hey, we went through training, we went through all this testing, we did all these things, so therefore we are ready, or you should be ready to go live with this new system. But in the reality is, well, yeah, but they didn't do it right, or they didn't do it, it wasn't accurate, or it didn't reflect reality, or whatever the case may be. And that's where so many companies get into trouble, is because they listen to their system integrator or their software vendor who says, yeah, you're ready, we did all the things we should have done, but the things they should have done wasn't the way they should have done it. So, you need someone that's agnostic, that isn't there to push you prematurely into a go live, that's there to say, here's what the risks really are, and help you understand what those risks are, so you can make an educated decision on whether or not you think you're really ready. And a lot of that's going to have something to do with your risk tolerance too. If you're a super conservative, risk adverse company, you're going to want to make damn sure that you have sorted through those qualitative, subjective things. And even if you aren't risk adverse, or as risk adverse as others, you still, there's still merit in doing that. So that's just some of the way that you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question from this video. How do you rebuild team morale while holding SIs accountable for quality and truth in status?
Good question, because big SIs and consultants in general, and I'll just make this broad generalization about consultants in general, not even just the big consulting firms, but it's more true with big consulting firms. We all have egos, myself included. We have egos. We think we're smart. And when you challenge us or say something that makes you think that maybe you don't think I'm as smart or as competent as I think I am, you're going to get defensive about it, and you're going to try and defend yourself and justify why you think you're right, or why you're so smart, or whatever. So I think that's what you bring up is a really good point, because when companies challenge consulting firms, just by asking questions, I don't mean in an adversarial, confrontational, rude kind of way. I mean, just as a person who's a steward of your company resources, your job is to manage money, resources, risk, minimize disruption, all that stuff. You have a right to ask those sorts of questions. But when your consultants get defensive about it and suggest that maybe you're the problem, or you should just trust me because we're the experts, I've done this 100 times, so why are you asking questions? Rather than get defensive, I mean, you just need to have a partner who's going to just tell you what you need to know, and be transparent enough to where hopefully you don't even have to ask those questions. I mean, that's the other thing. There's a lot of times we see clients that are asking questions that you shouldn't have to be asking that. Your consulting should be telling you those things, and it should be 100% clear to you, the good, the bad, the ugly. Anytime we see a product status report with all green on it, we call BS on it right away. We're like, there's no way that's true. Even if it's our own project where we're assessing ourselves, and if it's all green, I know our team's they're not digging hard enough, because there's always risk there. There's always problems that need to be addressed. And it tells me that you're either not analyzing it fully, or you're trying to protect yourself, or CYA, if it's all green. So I think, to your question, I mean, I think the keys are find the right partner that's not going to get demoralized when you start asking questions, because you have a right to ask questions. And quite frankly, if they do get demoralized, I wouldn't consider that your problem. I'd consider that the consulting firm's problems.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure, Eric. But what a great episode today. I feel like we dived into so many different things, and it was really insightful. Yeah,
really good stuff. And thank you for the great questions and co-hosting here today. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. And of course, thank you for Stuart for being a guest. Thank you to Stuart for being a guest here today. Again, new episodes every Wednesday, transformationgroundcontrol.com. Be sure to subscribe, follow it every week. We've got new episodes every Wednesday. Reach out to me if you'd like to learn about how Third Stage can help you with your digital transformation initiative, wherever in the world you are, whether you're in Europe or US or Asia Pacific, wherever you may be. Reach out to us. Be glad to brainstorm ideas with you and talk to you about how to potentially improve your digital transformation and put you on the right track to success. And if you'd like to collaborate on this podcast and other content that we produce, feel free to reach out to Major Tom Productions. I've included contact information below. So I hope you all have a great week. We look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care and have a great day.